Hello, everyone. So, I want to talk to you guys about the rise of Nazism and how, when Nazism is in its latent form, when it's at its embryonic stage, its beginning stage of development, most people don't really see it as a threat. They don't really even care to talk about it. Most people will just say those people are crazy, those Nazis are nuts, they're on the fringe, who really cares about them? They're not really important. The most important thing right now is, and they'll name some other enemy, communism, whatever. And there was a lot of this that was going on before the Jews were exterminated by the Nazis. And even a lot of Jewish people downplayed the actual threat of Nazism. Yes, a lot of Jewish people did this sort of thing, and this is quite a common tendency that us humans have. We tend to downplay the threat that is in front of us, and I think the reason why we do this is because we're scared. I think that's the reason why we do this. It's because we're scared and we don't want to face the reality of something extremely dangerous being right in front of us. I think a lot of people do this. We see this in just we see this sort of behavior in individuals in just regular sort of, not regular, but in activities that we don't consider very extreme, like surfing, for example. I mean, people go out into the ocean and go surfing, and you tell them, there's fish in there that eat people, right? There are fish in there that that actually will eat you alive, and they'll bite your leg off, and they'll say, oh, no, it's not really a big deal, it's not really a threat. And then you hear about a surfer getting bitten by a shark, and then they'll recover, and then what happens? What do we always hear? When it comes to these sorts of stories of surfers being bitten, we always hear about them going back into the ocean. All right, this is completely insane to me, but people tend to downplay what is in front of them. And I think a lot of it has to do with fear. They don't want to face the facts. They don't want to face reality. They want to be optimistic because optimism gives them a sense of comfort. I think that this explains, for the most part, this type of behavior. But anyway, I want to give you guys the story, to give you guys an example of what I'm talking about. I want to give you guys the story of Albert Hersfeld. Albert Hersfeld was a wealthy Jewish man living in Germany. He was the son of a major textile manufacturer in Dusseldorf, and he was in Germany witnessing the Nazis taking over Germany, and he watched as the Nazis slowly, gradually began to implement anti-Semitic policy. Even when he was seeing the Nazi policy in its embryonic stage, in its beginning stage, he was still expressing optimism, saying things like, well, this isn't the end of the world, saying things like, well, not all Nazis are bad. Yes, Mr. Hersfeld actually made this argument that not all Nazis are extremists, that some Nazis are actually moderate. And he used this observation as a way to argue that things were not as bad as they appeared. So, for example, this is the stuff that he experienced as the Nazis were becoming more and more explicit in their anti-Jewish policy. His artists club sent him 70th birthday congratulations and then expelled him 8 weeks later. So he was a part of this artist club, and he turned 70. He had a 70th birthday, and his artist club sent him a bunch of birthday cards. And you think, wow, this Jewish man is a part of this club, and the other club members are congratulating him for his birthday. They're wishing him a happy birthday. I mean, things aren't this bad. But this very club later on told him, we don't want no Jews here. Get out. And that happened 8 weeks after he received all of these birthday wishes. And it says here, the department store, Tietz, became the Kaufhaus des Westens. So the part of Nazi policy was to change the names of businesses, the names of businesses into more Germanic names. So if you had a business that was named after a Jewish person, they would change the name of that business with a German name. If a Jewish person had a Germanized Jewish last name, they would force him to remove that last name and change his last name into Israel. So, for example, Albert Hersfeld had to change his last name into Israel. So his name became Albert Israel. So they would say, okay, your last name is Hersfeld. That sounds Germanic. We don't really want you to have that kind of last name, so you're going to change your last name to Israel. And that's the thing about the Nazis that not a lot of people talk about, is that they were very obsessed with emphasizing the Middle Eastern roots of the Jews. And they did this in order to make more of a distinction between the Jew and the German, to make a radical divide, I should say, between the German and the Jew. And they really wanted to strongly and viciously convey the point that the German and the Jew are two different people. They're two different races. One is Aryan, Indo-European. One is Semitic, whose ancestors came from the Middle East, and so they are basically just Arabs. And in this book that I've been reading, it's called The Third Reich by Michael Burleigh. He talks about this fair that happened in Germany, where you had all of these Nazis gathered together, and they would say things, or they would present signs saying certain slogans that really emphasized the Middle Easternness of the Jews. So they would say things like, "Oh, the Lebanese of the country are gonna be vanquished," or something like that, right? They would say, they would call Jews Lebanese people. They would say, "Oh, they're basically just Lebanese people." And Lebanon and Israel are next to each other, and they are definitely related in the sense that they are Semitic. But they wanted to emphasize this Middle Easternness of the Jews in order to convey the message that the Jews were truly a different race from the German. There was one case where the Nazis got together and they said something like, "Judah shall be vanquished. Judah shall be gotten rid of," something like that. It was to emphasize the Middle Easternness of the Jewish people. And they would also associate them with animals. That was the dehumanization of the Jew. So, for example, I think Heinrich Himmler said something like that if you look at a deer, the way that a deer's snout is, it looks like the nose of the Jew. But regardless of the fanaticism of the Nazi, there was still this insane amount of optimism in people that it wasn't the end of the world, that not all Nazis were bad. And Mr. Albert Hersfeld, he exemplified this way of thinking. And it says here, offensive anti-Semitic placards appeared in display boxes situated outside the synagogue. The swimming pool in the Kaiser Wilhelm Park bore a sign saying Jews are not permitted entry. A plaque marking Heinrich Heine's house vanished, along with a statue of Mendelssohn. So Mendelssohn is still a very famous composer. He was a Jewish German who had converted to Christianity. And Mendelssohn was very famous then, just like he is now. But the Germans, the Nazis, did not want to praise or have any sort of remembrance for these Jewish German celebrities because they wanted to remove the Jewish demographic and they wanted to remove the idea of a Jewish German identity. So any sort of monuments or memorials dedicated to people of German Jewish descent had to be removed. And so that's why they removed statues of Mendelssohn, any sort of remembrance for Mendelssohn. It says here, for 35 years, Hersfeld had patronized the Muchelhaus Rusch for a lunchtime bowl of mussels. Now, it bore the sign, Jews unwelcome. There were some consolations in this extended litany of inhumanity. Hersfeld felt that the broad public is absolutely not anti-Semitic. So regardless of all the fanaticism that he was seeing, regardless of all of the anti-Jewish policy that he was seeing being implemented, Hersfeld still had hope. And he said, well, the vast majority of the German people are not anti-Semitic. I have no doubt that he was writing this from experience, because in the 1920s, you could have easily made that argument and people would have easily believed you. Because in the 1920s, most German people had no issue with the Jews in the 1920s. And when the Nazis began to persecute the Jews in the beginning, a lot of Germans said this is not right. There was even one Nazi who said that this was a crime, that this was immoral. So you could have easily made the argument that, well, this idea that a Holocaust was going to happen is impossible because so many Germans hate anti-Semitism. So many Germans are against anti-Semitism. So you could have made this argument even in the 1930s when the Nazis were implementing anti-Jewish policy. This is the misconception that a lot of people fall for. They'll say, well, the majority of people are decent. And you know what? You're correct. The majority of people are decent. But here's the thing. That does not stop genocide from taking place. Because one thing I've noticed about people is that everyone knows the difference between right and wrong. Everyone knows, okay, you don't exterminate people, you don't massacre people, you don't commit murder, you don't implement genocide, right? Everyone will say, I don't believe in genocide. The vast majority of people will say this, right? You're going to find some people who want to be edgy or who are just plain psychopaths, and they'll say, yeah, I love genocide. But the great majority of people are going to tell you that genocide is wrong. People can flip. And even when they believe that they're good people, they will still support evil. People will still support evil, even while believing that they are good people. And that's the danger. That is the veneer that deceives people so easily. People can become enraged at another group of people. And so they will support a party out of anger against that group of people, even while believing that they themselves are decent. Just because the majority of the people in a particular country are decent enough does not mean that that country is not going to commit some kind of genocide. And this idea that, well, the majority of the people are decent, this is not a good metric by which to make the claim that a particular country cannot or will not commit genocide. People make this mistake with Ukraine. I've heard this observation before that, well, the majority of Jews living in Ukraine will say that Ukraine does not have a Nazi problem. And then you look at the fact that you have streets named after Bandera and other Nazi collaborators in Ukraine. You look at the fact that a good number of the national heroes of Ukraine were Nazis and were Nazi collaborators. And I've said their names a million times, and I'll keep saying them until until enough people understand it. Shukovich, Melnik, Bandera, Nikola Lebed. These are people who were Nazi collaborators and were murderers. And they are praised by Ukrainian nationalists, and they are streets named after people like Melnik and Bandera and Shukovich. There are monuments dedicated to Nazi collaborators in Ukraine. And you look at that and you say, well, there's a serious problem here, right? There's a serious problem here. But people will come out. You have these pro-Ukraine types who will come out and say, well, actually, no, because they did a poll of Ukrainian Jews, and the majority of Ukrainian Jews have said that they're fine. Well, you know what? You could have made the same argument before the Holocaust. You could have made the same damn argument before the Holocaust. People like Albert Hersfeld here said the majority of people in Germany don't hate the Jews. Looking at the majority opinion of a Jewish population is not a metric. It's not a good way to gauge Nazi sentiment or an underlying Nazi ideology in a society, because things can be very, very deceptive. And you see this here in Albert Hersfeld. It says here, so there was a pogrom against the Jews in Germany. And it says, after the pogrom, Hersfeld wrote that 4/5 of party members, meaning Nazi party members, he knew disapproved of what had happened, and that the majority of the German population regarded the events with disgust. So there was this pogrom, Nazis went out hunting Jews, and Hersfeld said, well, 4/5 of all the Nazis I know told me that they disapprove of what happened. Yes, here's a Jewish person writing this. And he said the great majority of the German people disapproved of the pogrom. And that was his optimism. And he was deceived by his optimism. And what happened to Hersfeld? He was eventually murdered in the Holocaust. So let's rewind. Let's say we go back in the past. Let's say we go back in time. We go back to the 1930s, early 1930s. The Nazis have just won. And I say, The Nazis are going to kill the Jews. Well, how do you know that? There's going to be a Holocaust. Well, how do you know that? Well, look at their rhetoric. Look at their viciousness. Look at their anti-Christianity. Look at their neo-paganism. The Nazis are going to be mass murderers. And let's say that you disagreed with me. You would come out and say, well, we have Mr. Hersfeld here, who was a prominent Jewish person, and he is saying that the great majority of Nazi members that he knows are actually not anti-Semitic. And he says that the great majority of the German population are not anti-Semitic, and that in fact the great majority of the German population disagree with anti-Jewish pogroms and mob violence. Maybe you would look better in the argument. Maybe you would look like you knew what you were talking about, and I would look like some sort of doom and gloom fool. But you would be wrong. That's the thing. You would be wrong, just like the people who say that Ukraine does not have a Nazi problem are wrong. And they'll say, well, the majority of Jews in Ukraine say that Ukraine does not have a Nazi problem. And we can look at history, we can look at people like Albert Hersfeld, and we can say that is not an adequate metric by which to gauge the fanaticism of a society. Because a lot of the Jewish people in Germany thought that there was going to be no Holocaust. They didn't even think that there was going to be a Holocaust. They just saw that there were some fanatics in the Nazi party, but there were also a lot of moderates in the Nazi party. And this is why people get so easily deceived by this sort of presentation. Most people don't get up in the morning saying they want to kill people. Most people don't get up in the morning saying that they want to vote for a policy of genocide. What happens is that most people get caught up in the hysteria of some sort of a collective frenzy, some sort of a collective ideology, be it socialism, some kind of socialism, be it communism, be it nationalism, be it some sort of racism. They get caught up in the frenzy. What ends up happening is that they support, or they Sieg Heil, so to speak, for their party, for the party that they support. And because of that support, the government or the regime that they support end up being enabled to commit genocide. And that's what happens. They don't get up and say, oh, I just hope that a bunch of Jews get put into an oven. They don't say that. They get caught up in a frenzy. And so those people who get caught up in the frenzy are very decent people in normal life. They'll invite you to their home, they'll make you dinner, they'll be very hospitable for you. But when the moment comes in which their ideology, their worldview becomes more important than morals, more important than being vigilant against evil, then they don't want to face the truth and they will support their party over principle. We are seeing Nazism being revived. And this revival is in its embryonic stage, right? It's in its inchoate beginning stage. And so most people aren't noticing it, but I am noticing it. I'm noticing this shift. It's a gradual shift that a lot of people aren't seeing. Most people are not seeing, in fact, but I am seeing it. I was looking at YouTube earlier today. I saw this video from Candace Owens. Candace Owens, she's this very popular conservative commentator. And she was talking about Nazi book burning. And she was talking about how the Nazis burned books. And everyone has seen the scene from Indiana Jones where the Nazis are burning a whole bunch of books, and there's Indiana Jones and his dad, and they're trying to look for the diary, and then Indiana Jones ends up bumping into Hitler, and Hitler signs his autograph. Right? It's a very, very famous scene in cinema. So everyone has been told that the Nazis burned books. And Candace Owens comes along and she says, everyone knows that the Nazis burned books. What type of books were the Nazis burning? And she asks this question, of course, in a rhetorical way. And she says, a lot of the books that the Nazis burned were written by Marxists, and they were written by degenerates. And you know that the person that coined the term transgender was a German Jew by the name of Magnus Hirschel, or something like that.
Do you know which books the Nazis were burning? And I'm asking you this, and I'm telling you why it blew my mind, is because definitely something that we covered extensively, and you will cover extensively throughout the public education system, is the Holocaust, Nazi Germany. It's why so many people, when they're commenting, it seems like the only historical reference they have is, it's just like Hitler, they're literally Nazis. So that obsession with only referring to that historical aspect is partially because when you're in the public school system, you really focus on World War II and the Nazis. So I was shocked that I never learned throughout that schooling that the brown shirts, the student activists that went around burning a bunch of books, were burning books that they deemed to be Marxist and that they deemed to be overtly sexual. And one of the first and most notorious book burnings was the student-led destruction of the library at the Institute for Sexual Research. That library was founded by a man named Magnus Hersfeld, and he was the guy who actually first coined the term transsexual.
And she was stating this stuff, and she wasn't saying, oh, I Sieg Heil, she wasn't saying, oh, I love Hitler, but she was giving these facts. Why? All conservatives in the Western world hate Marxism. They are against the transgender ideology. And so she's saying, you know, the Nazis were against these things. The Nazis were against Marxism. The Nazis were against this transgender stuff. And I'm against Marxism. I'm against the transgender ideology. I don't support it. But I'm not going to go supporting Nazis because of that. I'm not going to go, because I'm against Marxism doesn't mean that I'm going to go support Nazism. Just like because I'm against Marxism does not mean that I'm going to go support Islamists. Because, you know, Islamists are also against Marxism. Islamists are against. America made that mistake when they armed the Mujahideen because they said, well, the Mujahideen is anti-communist, so let's support the Mujahideen. And that facilitated the inundation of Islamism in the world. Because they're against one type of fanaticism, they then support another form of fanaticism. This is the most dangerous mistake that human beings make. It's the most dangerous decision that human beings make, and human beings are very, very susceptible to this. They see one type of fanaticism that they are against, and so another fanatic will come and say, follow me, and the conservatives do this, right? They follow that fanatic. Just like the Germans hated Marxism, they were afraid of the rise of the Soviet Union, so they supported Adolf Hitler. So we're against these Marxist fanatics, so we're going to support this other fanatic named Hitler. And so Candace Owens was saying, basically implying that the Nazis were good guys. You're seeing this rift between Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro over Israel. And you see Candace Owens, she's interviewing Norman Finkelstein. She's very critical of Israel. And that has a very dangerous path when people become so excessively anti-Israel. Now, I am critical of Israel myself. I have done many videos criticizing Israel. I have no issue criticizing Israel. Criticism of a people, in many ways, is a hair split away from hating that group of people. We can criticize certain aspects of Israeli society, just like we can criticize certain aspects of American society or Russian society or Lebanese society or any society. We can criticize the governments of these societies, and we can make very legitimate points. But here's the thing, is that opportunists, ideological opportunists, political ideologues, they love to hide behind the facts. This is a term that I like to use, hiding behind the facts. They will present facts, but behind those facts, they hide their motivation. And they have a very evil motivation. Remember, the devil is called the accuser, and this is not for no reason. The devil is called the accuser. What does that mean? He accuses, right? Well, how do you accuse without judging? The devil judges us. He judges us, not in the same sense that God judges us. He doesn't have the authority of God, but he nonetheless judges us. He accuses us. And the devil will point out our sins. And the devil is right. Right? When he points out our sins, when he accuses us of doing certain things, he's right. This person does this particular sin. So-and-so does this particular monstrous sin, whatever it may be. He judges, but the devil has a motivation. See, God, he judges us because he loves us. He wants us to do right. He wants to put us on the straight and narrow path. The devil judges us because he hates humanity. He hates humanity to the point that he wants to wipe all of humanity out. And so the devil will point to facts. He will expose certain facts about certain people with the motivation of having one group of people exterminate another group of people. And we really have two choices. And I've said this before. We have two choices. We can choose God to be our judge, or we can choose the devil to be our judge. We choose God to be our judge because we want justice and mercy. We know that God judges us, but we also know that God is looking for any reason to be merciful for us. God is looking for any reason to put us into heaven. I know I've sinned. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I know I'm a weak person. I'm weak in my flesh. God understands, right? He judges, but he loves. The devil judges, but he hates. He judges, he wants to exterminate. And we can have the judgment of God, or we can have the judgment of the devil. And the devil will set up his own representatives on earth. He will set up, just like God has his human instruments by which those humans carry out the will of God. The devil has his own human instruments. He has his own judges, and those human instruments will carry out what the devil wants. Extermination, genocide, violence, murder. destruction. What does Jesus say? That the devil was a murderer from the beginning. The devil was a murderer from the beginning. The devil is a murderer. He wants to exterminate mankind. And he looks for ways to justify extermination. Well, the Jews, a lot of them are Marxists. A lot of the people pushing for Marxism are Jews. A lot of the people pushing for degeneracy, sexual degeneracy, are Jews. Therefore, the Nazis were the good guys. Candace Owens, when she made that statement about Nazi book burning, she was basically implying, oh, the Nazis were the good guys. And you're seeing this sort of sentiment rising up. You're seeing it, you're seeing it, you're seeing it. I'm seeing it. And you're seeing it in the rise of nationalism. You see this AfD party in Germany and how certain members of the AfD have some very nasty things to say about the Holocaust. For example, and I've said this before, Björn Höcke, he basically said that he was sick and tired of seeing Holocaust memorials. There was one AfD leader who was caught dancing on top of a Holocaust monument. There was one AfD leader who said, "Hitler, please come back, we miss you." I mean, you look at all of these signs. What does this tell us? It tells us that if the AfD gets ultimate power, it will commit genocide. But a lot of Germans don't want to see it. And a lot of the Germans who vote for the AfD, I'm sure, are very decent people. But they're so caught up in their nationalism that they put nationalism above their own vigilance. They don't even give a damn about being vigilant against this sort of creeping evil. But we have a choice between choosing God to be our judge or choosing the devil to be our judge. And the devil has his own prosecutors. He's got his own judges. He has his own human representatives. And the devil will set up his own tribunals. And in those tribunals, in the satanic Luciferian tribunals, there is no mercy. The devil is looking for any reason to justify extermination. And God is looking for any reason to save us. So we have to make that decision. We have to make that choice between God or Luciferian tyranny. Anyway, you guys have just heard some theology. God bless.